Hello, friends. My name is Steve, and we're here today for another episode of Page Chewing. And we're here with P.L. Stewart, Mihir from Fantasy Book Critic, and our friend Davis Ashura, the author. So thank you for joining us today, Davis.
Oh, I'm happy to join you.
Yeah. And will you start us off with an introduction?
Sure. I'm Davis Ashura. I practice medicine and I write epic fantasy novels. So that's a weird combination, but somehow it works for me. I published my first novel in 2014. That was A Warrior's Path. And my books are epic fantasy, although there are a couple that would be YA. Those I wrote for my kids, my teenage sons. But all of them incorporate aspects of my Indian heritage as I understand it. I was born in India but grew up in America, so I don't have the same level of knowledge of some aspects of Indian culture as say Mihir would have. But I love my culture, my heritage that I came from, specifically my Telugu culture. So I wanted to make sure that the characters that I wrote about looked like people that I know who are Indian, and that my culture is used in a way that's honored. So that's basically it. My most recent series is Instrument of Omens, which is kind of like my homage. There it is to Wheel of Time and Lord of the Rings. And then I've got a new book that just released on November 8th called Blood of a Novice, which I'll be happy to talk about later.
Nice. Awesome. And Mihir, can you tell us a bit about yourself?
Yes. So hi everyone. My name is Mihir Wanchu. I am a reviewer for Fantasy Book Critic. I have been a fan of Davis Ashura when I first got introduced to his series, the Cast and Outcast series, beginning with The Warrior's Path. I've gotten to know him better, and I recently got to read his newest book, A Blood of the Novice, which was pretty cool. And you can find me at Fantasy Book Critic, where, and thanks to Steve, he tolerates me and he gets me to join in on these talks. So this is really wonderful.
Oh, cut it out. And PL, will you give us an introduction?
Hey, I'm P.L. Stewart. I'm sure I'm about to become one of Davis's newest fans. My TBRs just keep growing. It sounds amazing. Cover looks great, by the way, Davis.
Thank you.
Mihir showed up, so I'm sure that your books will definitely be going on my TBR after this broadcast. Yeah. Oh man, gorgeous. Really, yeah, sounds right up my alley. I'm the author of the John Kingdom Saga. I am also an assistant editor with Before We Go blog. I'm led by the wonderful Beth Tabler. Steve's also a blogger there, and I'm also one of the co-hosts with Steve and the lovely and talented Taylor from Maybe Two Pages of Page Chewing. So I'm honored to be here today with Steve and Mihir, who I know and love, and of course, great to meet Davis.
Good to meet you too.
Awesome. Mihir, did you want to kick us off with a question?
Yes. So, Davis, can you tell us, you have 4 different series which are going on, if I'm not wrong. Like the Cast and Outcast is finished, the William Wilde series is finished, but the Instruments of Omens is ongoing, and you have started a new series as well. But all of them are set in this unique concept called the Anchored Worlds. Can you talk a little bit more about that and how you got started into writing all of these fantastic books?
Sure. So I wrote The Cast and the Outcast, and I thought the series was done and the characters were done. And then I started writing the first book in the Chronicles of William Wilde. And that's the first 2 of those are kind of YA, which I wrote for my teenage sons. And when I started writing it, one of the main characters from Cast and the Outcast insisted that she belonged in that story. That was never my intention. And so somehow she crept in, and then she brought along some other people, and suddenly I had these 2 universes that I needed to unify. And there's a way of traveling from realm to realm, so it's not world to world; it's more like universe to universe. So you can actually travel in both time and space. And so I needed a name for it, so I thought, what would be kind of cool? Well, they're traveling along these lines and they anchor to each other in these realms. So that's how I came up with the Anchored Worlds. And I'd always known I'd wanted to write a big epic fantasy series like Wheel of Time. I mean, I love that series. And so while I was writing William Wilde, I also created the world that became the world of Instrument of Omens. And so I tied those two together in William Wilde, and there you have it. Suddenly I had 3 worlds with references to 2 others, and kept on going from there.
Thank you. So now that you've given us an introduction, to this concept that you have written about, what is your preference for, which book or series should the reader start out with? Because you have 3 different ones, right?
Yeah. So the thing about it is that they're all unified with in a singular universe or universes, the anchored worlds, but you don't have to actually read any of the others to enjoy a series. So if you started out reading William Wilde, you actually don't have to have read Cass and the Outcast, and you don't have to go on to read Instrument of Omens. That story is relatively complete, although there's some hanging threads that I'll eventually get to. And the same goes with Instrument of Omens. You don't have to have read William Wilde or Cass and the Outcast, or if you choose to read the Cass and the Outcast, you don't have to go on to read anything else. Personally, I think the best book I ever wrote was actually the last book I wrote, which was Blood of a Novice.
Mm-hmm.
And if you read Blood of a Novice, again, you don't have to read anything else that I've written to appreciate and enjoy it. I think the best series I've written so far is Instrument of Omens, though. And so if you wanted to get a taste of what I'm like at my best, it would probably be that one.
And you said you wrote your first book for your teenage sons. What was their reaction when you
So
produced the book?
it was actually my 4th book. So I wrote the Cass and the Outcast, and then I wanted to figure out something to write. They were whining that they couldn't find any books to read in the bookstore. I guess they weren't into, princesses saving the day. They wanted the prince again. And so, William Wilde was born from that. And they read the first book, both of them. They enjoyed the first book. And then they never read anything else after that. I was like, you sons of a. And so after I realized they weren't going to, I was like, all right, then I'm just going to write what I want as far as epic fantasy is concerned, because this is pulling teeth trying to write YA for me. It's just a different skill set. And there were so many cool things that I felt like I wanted to include that would definitely drive it towards epic fantasy. And the thing is that YA still deals with a lot of hard, harsh issues. But I wanted room to expand the world. I wanted to really kind of blow it up. So once I realized they weren't going to read it, I was like, all right, then I'm writing what I want. I'm writing bigger books too.
And when you were writing your YA books, what are a couple of things that you wouldn't do to not make it, to kind of push the boundary for YA? So what are a couple of things that you left out that you may have included if it hadn't been a YA book?
If it hadn't been YA, I probably just would have dived straight into the bigger, more robust world building. And instead I had to do that later on in the series, sort of explaining how magic works, what the history and the lore is like. And I think those are the things that I would have wanted to do, like really go ahead and start talking about why they're doing what they're doing from the very beginning. I might have aged the characters a little bit more because they start out as seniors in high school. So, when you're a senior in high school, unless you're like Frank and Joe Hardy with their own cars and boats and stuff, you're kind of limited in what you're able to do as far as just getting around. So those are some of the things that I probably would have wanted to do if I didn't write YA.
So Davis, if I may ask you a question, you mentioned this, like, you have a strong love for, epic fantasy.
Oh, yes.
When did it begin? Like, what was the book or author or series even which kind of, ignited the love for you?
So I'm kind of old, and so I grew up back in the 80s, and I started out. It was kind of weird, but I started out reading Hardy Boys, believe it or not, when I was in 4th grade. I just remember seeing a kid on the bus reading a Hardy Boy book all the time, and I was like, he looks like he's having kind of fun, so maybe I should try that. And so I read that. I read a bunch of biographies. And then I started reading Greek, Norse, Roman mythology, and then I read The Hobbit. And that's when everything changed. So I read The Hobbit, and I have been chasing that drug throughout the rest of my life. You know, I read The Hobbit, then I read Lord of the Rings, then I read The Silmarillion, then I read Sword of Shannara, Elfstones of Shannara, Thomas Covenant. And so I've been chasing that same feeling that I got from The Hobbit pretty much ever since I was 13 years old. But that was the first book. It was The Hobbit that changed everything. And sometimes you can find it in science fiction, like I found it in Isaac Asimov's books, even in Arthur C. Clarke's books, The City and the Stars, or even Dolphin Island, Rendezvous with Rama. Yeah, that was a great one. I got teased a lot for that one because that's my real name. But there were so many books that I was chasing that feeling, probably still even to this day.
Well, that's awesome. I think we're somewhat contemporaries, Dave's, in terms of, you know, 53. So those are a lot of the books you're talking about are books that I started out reading when I was younger too. So it's just fascinating. If I may ask you a question, I was wondering, before we came on, we went live, we were just chatting, and we understand that you're a medical doctor. Does your experience as a medical doctor, does that play into your writing? Is there an element of that that's managed to seep into your writing?
Not really, because what I do is sort of nerdy and odd, and it doesn't really lend itself to action or conflict. I mean, it could if I wanted to, but I think it would only be appealing to another endocrinologist, and everybody else would be like, "What the heck is this crap?" So it's not like I'm a trauma surgeon. They would have lots to draw upon, or even just a general surgeon, or even anybody in an acute care setting would have a lot more to draw upon that would seem more relatable to the general readership. Now, in terms of how I approach the writing, that's also not related to medicine. But the one thing that I think that being a doctor has given me is when you go through med school, residency, fellowship, you're studying for all these tests all the time. And so the ability to focus and just lock your brain in to what you need to do at that particular moment, which is write, that's been invaluable. So that's something that just came with training and helped me transition as far as my writing is concerned. So when I sit down to write, I can do it and lock in to do it. So that's the one area that becoming a doctor probably helped more than anything else.
And so I'm fascinated by your works. Like I said, it sounds right up my alley. You talked about before about a bit about the fact that culturally you're very proud of your culture, your heritage. Does that show up at all in your work? Is there a link there between your background as an Indian person and your work?
So I'm specifically from a state called Andhra Pradesh, and the way we name things like maternal grandmother versus paternal grandmother is different. I'm a Manainama. And those kind of familial relationships, it's elegant and it's exact and it's really beautiful. So I wanted to include those simple things into the writing, and that's in the cast and the outcast. Everything from even the philosophy and theology of Hinduism. I don't bring in gods or anything like that, because I think that's kind of insulting to take a religion's gods and pretend that it's mythology, because that's not mythology to a billion people. It's religion. So I don't touch on that. But things like religious ceremonies or spirituality or the philosophy underlying the theology, I do utilize that in the cast and the outcast, Instrument of Omens, and especially Blood of a Novice. And again, the way the characters appear, they look like Indians. That was intentional as well. So those are the things that, jump off the top of my head as far as bringing India into the books, as far as I can tell. And of course, the cast and the outcast, that's an obvious, titling. There's the caste system in India, then there's the outcast. And so, I had my own point to make about that. So that's why I wrote it the way I did.
So, Davis, if I may, you mentioned that you didn't want to put in the gods and everything, but you did draw a lot from mythology. You did draw in a lot from the culture. One thing, because I remember reading the cast in the first book, and I remember there's a huge thing that you brought in was the Rakshasas. Now, for readers who might not know that, because you and me, like any Indians, like we know what the Rakshasas are, we know the whole mythology, and they're complex creatures. They're not necessarily evil, but they're complex creatures with sometimes good ability, sometimes bad sides, but everything. It's like the whole gamut of them. But for the readers and who might want to read those caste and outcasts, but are a little bit worried that am I going to understand this or not? Can you talk a little bit more about the element of Rakshasas and how you kind of drew them in and what makes the story so epic?
Sure. There's a realm called the realms of the Rakshasas that I created for the story, and in the universe of the anchored world, there's Davesh, which is God, which is a name of God in Hinduism, and on the opposite side there's just an unnamed being, and so it's almost like a bipolar universe where realms will swing between Davesh and the unnamed one, and the realms swing more towards the unnamed one. And within the realms, there are the Rakshasas, who are basically people. They're powerful people, but it's a dystopian world because that's who the Rakshasas are. They have some good elements, so they actually can be redeemed, and they can rise. So in other words, instead of a fallen angel, I'm dealing with risen demons in some sense, which I don't think anyone's ever actually written about risen demons before. But in Instrument of Omens, an entire world of risen demons tries to return to God, basically. And that's where the Rakshasas came from. I always wanted to play around with this notion of, can evil be forgiven? Can they forgive themselves and reach forgiveness through God? And so my answer was, I hope so. That's kind of deep, man. I'm sorry.
No, it's good.
And you also mentioned like the covers, they represent like like how a typical Indian person, especially the first book, if I'm not wrong, the first book of Warrior's Path. I know that the previous covers were a little different when you're starting out, but then you managed to get them like redone with the new artist, and the new covers for the Caste and Outcast series are tremendous. Can you talk a little bit more about them, like how you got them? Like, did you work with the artist, or did you give them like a sketch?
Yeah, so I started publishing in 2014. I'm an indie author, meaning I do it myself, except for my audiobooks, which my publishers produce for me. But I didn't know anything in 2014. I mean, I basically wrote the book, edited the book, hired who I could as far as an editor is concerned to do the copy editing and the grammar. And then I hired a friend to do the cover art and slapped it together, put it out on Amazon, and I was like, all right, let's see what happens. And I didn't have any expectations that anything would happen. I thought, at least it's published and I like it, so maybe somebody else will. And I was shocked that anybody actually bought the book. And I even remember when I sold 100 copies, I mean, I was like texting my wife, it's at 99, it's at 99 cents. And then it got to 100 and we celebrated by having dinner, the whole family, just because I didn't expect it to sell 10, much less 100. And then it kept on selling. And then after about a year, I realized my covers really needed work and they weren't great, the ones that I had. And a friend of mine, Jacob Cooper, sort of was like, your book's really good, but your covers aren't really selling them. Maybe you ought to think about upgrading them a bit. So I got second covers, which were fantastic, by Jeff Brown. And then a friend of mine, two friends of mine, Bryce O'Connor and Phil Tucker. They're also authors. They were using an artist from Greece named Andreas, and so I love their covers. They're gorgeous, and so they got me in touch with Andreas. And originally, I was just going to ask Andreas for like a character sketch, but when he created what he created, and it wasn't the cover for book 1, that became the cover for book 3. I saw that and I was like, I've got to have that, because that is just amazing. So basically what I did was I described the setting of the character and the setting, and then Andreas like lifted everything that I could have imagined and didn't, and created this incredible artwork with it. And so when I saw that, then I had to work with him for A Warrior's Path and book 2 as well. And then I also hired him for, of course, Instrument of Omens. Of course, now he's super busy with Magic the Gathering, so he's not able to do the covers anymore. So I've had to move in a different direction, but it's still the same process of providing a brief, which is basically, this is what the character looks like, what they're doing, this is the setting, and these are some images that I sort of have in mind that hopefully will inspire you to create what will work, and that's where we go with.
Wow, that's amazing. So Davis, like, I mean, I'm someone who can definitely learn from you, because I'm relatively new to the indie publishing thing. I've only published 2 books. I'm currently working my 3rd, but you've been in this game a long time. You're a seasoned veteran, and you were an indie author long before it became somewhat vogue to be an indie author.
Yeah.
And I can't imagine. It's fascinating for me to listen to experience the authors you who came in at a time when people didn't really understand what indie authorship was all about. And can you tell us what the landscape was like then? I mean, what made you decide to self-publish as opposed to traditionally published, which back then would have been, I think, seemingly the way to go. What made you decide to go that way, and how's that all turned out?
So it turns out that there's a lot I didn't know in 2014. I still don't know a lot now. But back in 2014, the reason I went indie is because, I sent out like 100 query letters to agents, got 0 response. Nobody even wanted to look at the book, much less, even read a chapter. They wanted nothing to do with it. It was just all form letter, form letter, form letter. So, I did that, and I was like, all right, screw it, then I'll just do it myself. And, I own my practice, so I'm not afraid of, doing business. So I published it. Now, I didn't know a lot back then, because I told you my cover was terrible. It was. And so in order to really make it as an indie author, there has to be certain elements that will capture a reader's attention. The cover doesn't have to be beautiful. It just has to be enough for somebody to click on the link, and then the blurb is where you really need to gather their attention. I didn't know any of these things. I didn't have a great cover, and I didn't have a good blurb. So I would have done a lot of things differently, but nobody knew what they were doing back then. Like if you look at Michael Manning's very first book, Blacksmith's Son, I mean, it had this weird, like, I don't even know what it was. It's a much better cover now, but back then I just thought, what is he doing? But we were all just kind of like playing around, trying to figure it out. And as things have progressed, we've become more professional in how we approach that publishing aspect, because there's a lot more resources. So back in 2014, I don't know if ArtStation was a thing. I know DeviantArt was a thing, but finding really good artists out there was really tough. I didn't know how to do it. Now you do know how to do it. Look on ArtStation or ask people, because there's so many authors out there that are willing to tell you, these are the artists that I use. There wasn't a big wide pool of great editors out there either, but nowadays, with the big publishing houses basically farming out all this work, I mean, they still have in-house editors, but these people are not making a great living in New York City with New York City rents. So they kind of need, some extra work. And so there's a lot of them that are doing side gigs to do editing for people. That wasn't really available in 2014. So that professionalism is available now that I didn't have awareness of back in 2014. Like, how would I have wanted to put a more professional looking book together? Now, this is totally different than the creative writing aspect, because that's an art, right? What we're talking about is I didn't know the business of writing, of publishing. And that's something that I've kind of, which is two separate things. There's the art of writing, business of publishing. And I didn't know anything about the business of publishing. And I've learned more about the art of writing by hiring better editors over time.
Is this something that, now that you are essentially an entrepreneur and entrepreneur, and you've been successful, obviously, and kudos to you for doing it, because not everyone can be successful running their own business, irrespective of what that business is. So you have a successful medical practice, and you're successful as a self-published author. So, yourself a pat on the back. So is this something that, is this for you? Is this the path? Are you thinking in the future of revisiting traditional publishing? Are you quite content and happy to continue to pursue your writing through self-publishing? What's in store for the future, you think, if you can disclose any of that?
I don't know. I'm pretty mercenary right now with my writing, because when I try to get anybody interested in Cast and the Outcast, nada. William Wilde, nothing. Instrument of Omens, first book, Testament of Steel, nothing. I got crickets all the way down the line. And, I've done pretty well. And so it's like, do I really need a traditional publishing house for anything at this point? The areas that they could help are get you into a bookstore, into a bricks and mortar bookstore. And there might be more opportunities, to have the book turned into some sort of game or TV show or movie. I mean, those are like winning the lottery. I mean, how many are there? Unless your intellectual property has sold millions of copies already, it's just not likely. So it's kind of like, if a traditional publishing house wanted something of mine, I'd be happy to talk to them about it. But from my perspective, the finances would just have to make a lot of sense, because I'd be giving up a lot on the hope that they could do something for me. And so they better be able to do something. Otherwise, moving on.
So, Davis, I wanted to ask you this. I believe, even though you're indie, you're a self-published author, you're kind of a little bit of a hybrid, in the sense that, because you have your ebooks and, like the paperback books published by you, but you have your audiobooks published by Podium Audio. And you have got Nick, I'm sorry for mispronouncing his last name, I don't know, Podell, who does the audio for your, how did that come out to be?
Yeah, Nick is wonderful. So I've gotten to work with so many wonderful creative people, like Andreas to do the cover art. I mean, those covers are so gorgeous. And it's like, man, I hope my books are as good as the cover, because those covers are just awesome. And I have nothing to do with it other than just saying, can you do something like this, Andreas? And he does something way beyond that. And same with Nick. When I first did an audiobook, I think that was in 2015. And back then the audiobook market was still kind of new. And so basically I emailed Nick, I cold called him and said, can you narrate my book? And Nick was like, all right, it costs this much. Can you do it and send it to me, and I'll take care of it. And so that's basically what happened. Is I cold called Nick, and then he read the book, and then he called me, and then we spent like 2 hours going over name pronunciations, how characters sounded. He sent me this big Excel file. So that was a lot of fun, because I got to get to know Nick. And then I uploaded it myself, book one of Cast and the Outcast, onto Audible. And people started listening to it, and it sold really well. And I think by then I had the better covers too. So that helped a lot. And then when I saw that it was doing well, then I was like, oh, I'm going to be able to afford to hire Nick for book 2 also. So then I hired him for book 2. And then I reached out to Audible Studios, which is the audiobook arm for audible.com. And then they purchased the rights to book 3 and also for William Wilde. And then for Instrument of Omens, I was actually just going to do that myself, and Podium just made me an offer I couldn't refuse. And so I was happy to sign with them. They've done a fantastic job. And they made sure I got Nick for Instrument of Omens. But I've got Travis Baldry, the author of Legends and Lattes for the most recent book, Blood of a Novice. And that was a funny story because how did I get in touch with Travis? I was working with somebody, and then I think I emailed Travis and just asked if I could talk to him. And so then I ended up having like an hour-long Zoom meeting with him, convinced him to come down to DragonCon in 2021, and then asked him, you know, if he would be interested in narrating a book for me. And then he was like, sure, man, I'd be happy to. And so I ended up selling the book to Podium, Blood of a Novice, but it was under the agreement that Travis narrates. And so that's how I got Travis. Just kind of reached out to him.
You're making it out to be way easy. I know it's not that easy because, you know, I've looked at your Audible, like, you know, the ratings of your books. They're in the thousands. And you've gone from like Nick Podell to Travis Baldry. Like, they're both really fantastic, you know, narrators. So like kudos to you on that. But also like it speaks to your books how good they are, because I mean, you don't get ratings like that just, you know, because if the book is okay or average, or even if the narrator is good. The book needs to be good. The narrator needs to be good. That's when, you know, the people who love it are going to give it such fantastic ratings. So kudos on that, Davis.
Well, thank you. I do appreciate that. But again, Nick is an incredible narrator. I really do think he makes the books better than anybody else. And the same holds true with Travis. I mean, he had to actually copy Nick because there are a couple of characters, at least one, who's in Blood of a Novice, who's been in other books. And she has a voice, and Nick has created that voice. So I had to send voice files of Nick doing her voice, and Travis had to mimic her. He did a great job.
Wow,
she's the same person that created the Anchored Worlds too. So
that's incredible. Even just now, to think of having audiobook narrators of the caliber of Nick and Travis. I mean, Travis is a best-selling author in his own right. Now, on top of being a famous audiobook narrator, like, you know, and Nick is obviously well known and, you know, well established as a great, you know, audiobook narrator. So, I mean, I think you, in my mind, I tend to agree with you, Davis, in that I think you have a really successful game going on that I don't know what more a traditional publisher could offer you except for backing up a boatload of cash to your front door for, you know, the rights to make your books into a movie or something. But other than that, or international distribution rights, like, you know, I mean, I don't know. I think you're doing extremely well. So,
well, if there are any agents that listen in and they want to sell the foreign rights, those haven't been sold, and the books have sold really well, you know. So I would love to talk to anybody about that, but, you know, I'm not also jumping around hoping for it. I'd rather just write. I mean, honestly, that's what I get the most joy out of is, you know, my wife sometimes asks me, or she used to ask me when I finished the book, aren't you happy? And I was like, no, I mean, it's done, but it was the process of writing that I love the most. And then this business aspect, I do it because, you know, I could not do it and it'd be fine, but I choose to do it because I feel like I put a lot of work into it, and I'm not just going to put the book in a bookshelf and nobody reads it. So I fight to get them seen because I feel like the books deserve it. They deserve my effort. But my joy comes from the writing of them. That's where I really am happiest, is when I get to write.
And you had mentioned the art of writing versus the writing business. Which is most time consuming, the writing portion or the business part of it?
The writing, absolutely the writing. I'll spend time on advertising and on the cover art and contracts, all that kind of stuff. But that's not something I'm going to put a lot of time into. I will put what time I need to put into it to make sure the book has a chance and do the best I can for the book. But some people, it's like, those crazy couponers. Remember that from like 5 or 6 years ago? They would spend like 4 hours a day looking for coupons so that they could buy $400 of groceries for $3 or something like that. And I'm like, just get a job, man. I mean, that's 4 hours a day, 7 days a week. That's 28 hours. I mean, that's a lot of work, for $400. And I don't want to spend that much time doing that kind of stuff. And I'm in a good position that I don't need to financially, just because of the work that I do. So I would rather do what I enjoy doing. And I'll definitely work on the marketing and the business, but that'll never be like the majority of the time. Man, that would suck. That would just be misery.
It's funny you say that, Davis, and again, I applaud you for that. I found that, and that's just because of the path I took, that now that the other stuff, the non-actual physically sitting at the computer writing, takes up more time for me than and I have my wife, my lovely wife, who's my business partner, that manages a lot of the business side for me. But even still, I find that the social media presence, I don't know how active you are on social media. With social media, I'm involved with so many other things like page chewing, which has only been amazing, and podcasts and interviews and social media, and I do a blog and then trying to interview authors, and for a written book, I just found that the rest of that has taken up. Now it's the vast preponderance of that is taken over. The writing of the book is actually now the easy part, not easy, but it's the part that I have to devote least amount of time to, which is a weird thing.
Right.
Of course, mind you, I'm not as prolific as you are, so I only write a book a year. So I suppose if I want to up that, you better. But it's fascinating to hear you talk about the fact that and you've been so successful while still. So you're very efficient and smart guy. You're working smarter, not harder. Maybe I'm just working harder. I'm smart enough, but you've obviously been successful devoting a minimum of time to the marketing. All that, but of course, hopefully, like you, I'll get smarter as I get older and more experience in the game, and but that's fascinating to hear your perspective about how, as a fellow author, how that, what that balance is between the actual writing and the marketing.
Yeah,
stuff.
I mean, my job takes a lot of time. I have a full-time job, and man, if I had to do stuff on top of that I didn't enjoy, and it was like hours, like I was talking about those couponers doing 4 hours of stuff that I would hate. I don't think I could do it. So I have, I've always tried to build over time, not always, but once I was in a position where I could reach out and ask people for help, and I paid them for their help, to have them do things that I don't want to do, and then I offload that stuff. That saves me a certain amount of time and pressure, and it's like if you make a certain amount, and then you can hire somebody to do the work that you don't want to do, why not do it? Like I get terrible allergies mowing the lawn. It only take me a half hour. I've got a small lawn, but I'm not going to do it because getting my butt kicked mowing the lawn with the allergies will put me out for a day. Where I'm, my face is all swollen and I can't breathe. B, I'd rather pay somebody else to do something that I don't want to do. And so, I used to do all of the handyman stuff around my house. Like I'd replace toilets, put in flappers, replace tanks, change light fixtures, build my own furniture just because I couldn't find anything I liked. And so I'd build what I needed. I'd still like to do that, but most of the handyman stuff, it's like, somebody else can do that. I don't want to do it.
I feel you. I feel you that way too. I totally concur with you on that. And I find as I get older, I work for full time as well. I think what it came down to is, as you get older too, you realize that it's not just your time, but if you get up up on your ladder to do use troughs or to fix the roof,
Yeah,
fix the
or
roof,
just
or
blow
you're
the leaves off.
yeah, or you're mudding. If you're mudding and tacking, and you're
Mhm.
you're putting up drywall and you get hurt, well then that affects your regular job. And when you get older, you don't heal quite as quickly. And
Yeah.
you being a doctor, you know that better than anyone.
I
And
mean, bending over, just putting tile down at 52, 53, like we are.
yeah,
Oh man, our backs will feel that.
yeah.
So will our knees.
Yeah, so I find now it's I totally agree with you. It's a much better investment of money and saving yourself, to have someone else do it, right? But I think when it comes, sorry.
I was going to say that's sort of the same perspective I took with some of the marketing. Like, there's so many aspects that I don't like, and whatever I can do to offload the stuff that I don't like, I'd like to do. So my wife knows this, and so she's starting to help me with some of these different things. And then again, I hired some people to help with everything from business strategy for the future, which I'm kind of shelving, to just helping me with just different things that is not in my wheelhouse and it's not fun for me.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I mean, in recent years, we've gotten my stepson to take over website management and
Mm-hmm.
all the social media stuff. And of course, I said just like you, my wife she's always been from the beginning. Thank God, she was all in on
Yeah.
being a business partner, because when we incorporated the business, we got a tax lawyer, we got an accountant, we did the whole thing, and she deals with a lot of that. So I don't, and she frees me up so much. I'm so grateful for her. Thank you, Deb, honey, if you're watching. I love you. But yeah, I feel the same way. But do you ever find, Davis, that in all of that, you have people to help you do certain things, but obviously they can't write for you, right? You have to do
Right.
the writing, right? And even
Yeah.
so, I mean, you're a doctor, you have a very busy career, and I'm sure there's times when perhaps as much as you love writing, you may deal with what's commonly referred as writer's block or lack of inspiration, or you may hit a slump. You know what I mean? Where you don't feel it. How do you handle those times when things are difficult? Maybe there's big stuff going on in your life, in your practice, in your medical practice, and whatever. Like, how do you cope with slumps? Are you the kind to try and just keep pushing through with writing no matter what? Do you,
I used to just sort of bang my head into the nail and try to drive it through with my forehead, and that hurt really bad. That hurts a lot. There's a reason why hammers are used rather than your forehead. And as I've gotten further along, I'll just take days off. If I'm not in the mood to write that particular day, I don't write. And what actually happens is that when I go back to it, I'm like way more efficient. And so, I don't worry about having to do the same, be in the same space. I'm happy just going somewhere else, like going to the bookstore, going to my medical office, going to a different office, going to a different place, and just trying it out and seeing maybe the writing will come easier here. And that's helped me a lot also. But I don't get too hung up on anymore on I have to write this many words this particular day. Now, every day I'll write something, but it might just be a sentence or a paragraph. And it might be at the end of the day, like right before I go to bed, because my brain is decluttered. And then I write a sentence, and suddenly I've written the 1,000 words I'm supposed to write. Or I might just write a paragraph, but there's something there that I can then go to the next day if I want to. And I just give myself forgiveness for not, stressing so hard over it.
That was very extremely eloquently said, Davis. I think that last point, giving yourself, forgiving yourself when you don't write, as much as you think somewhere empirically, somewhere in the back of your head, you should write. I think that's a key. Being not too hard on yourself, because it's a hard business, writing.
Yeah, it's a hard art. It's very labor intensive. You're by yourself. You're alone. Nobody knows what you're doing, because to know what you're doing, they have to have read it. That's a lot of time you're asking them to spend on it. It's not like listening to music or something. I mean, people have an instant emotional response. It takes 2 or 3 minutes, maybe 5. So it's very different compared to what we do. And again, this is something that I also learned, is that there are people for whom the writing is an art, but it's also just a business. They're not interested as much as I am in creating something. What I write is what I want to read. And for other people, it's no, you have to write for the readership, because your job is as an author. That's how you make your money. And that's two totally different and valid ways of approaching writing. I write because I enjoy it, and I don't have to get as hung up on it being my primary source of revenue. Other people, it is their primary source of revenue, so they don't have that luxury of just saying, well, I want to write just what I want to read. They have to be a little bit more mercantile about things. And that's okay also. It's just the different ways we approach things.
Davis, I wanted to ask you this, because you mentioned all your writing styles, and you take certain gaps in between when you're having a hard day, because of course your work your actual work is really mentally exhausting as well, while being physically exhausting. You also write big books. You don't write slim volumes. I've read a few of your books. They're like, and I don't mean that as a pejorative. Like, it's not a bad thing that you write big books, but they're lengthy, because there's a lot of world building, there's a lot of character work and everything like that. How, on an average, how much time or how many months do you take to write a book, now that you've written like 12 plus books?
About 8 months. Each book is about 8 months. And and it's not like it's a slow, steady 8 months. It's like bursts of writing that just happens. And so I might go a week where I'll write 10,000 words, and the next week I might write 30,000. But in my head, I have a mental clock that, NaNoWriMo, that November novel writing month, is supposed to be 50,000 words in a month. In my head, I'm like, if those amateurs can do it, I can do it. So in my head, it's like, I got to get to 50,000 just to make sure that I can keep up with the amateurs.
Is there an ideal length that you plan out for a book before you start writing, or you just like write with and you just write it to until where you feel the story is complete?
So in Instrument of Omens, like I said, those were my homage to big fantasies, Lord of the Rings and Wheel of Time. And it really is an homage, because there's elves and dwarves, my take on them, but you can see how they would come from Tolkien. And there's this long extended world history that goes back at least 3,000 years, and the people talk about events just like it's common knowledge. Like we'd say George Washington, the man who is the first president of the United States, and he was the general in charge of the Continental Army that fought off the British and won freedom for the 13 continents. Nobody says that. We just say George Washington, and everybody knows who we're talking about. And that's how these people discuss their history. It's just history to them, but it stretches back 3,000 years. And that's the way Jordan did with Wheel of Time, which I thought was beautiful. But as far as those books were concerned, they were meant to be long, because that's what I was trying to honor. And so I wrote to the length that I wanted the books to land. I wanted 200,000 words. It was a nice even number, and I didn't really want to go much further than that, because then I was afraid I was going to be bloating the writing, where extra stuff that sort of slows down the plot and is less clean. So that's where I'm trying to hit, is 200,000 words. And with Blood of a Novice, the newest book, that's actually the longest book I've ever written, that was also 200,000 words. And that's just, and have you all read Blood Song by Anthony Ryan? I love that book. That first book was just beautiful. And it was always, it was so tight, and that singular focus. I can't remember the main character's name.
Waylon Alsorna.
Yeah. So I love that tight focus. Like, you were always in his head. And I loved being in his head. And so I took a lot of inspiration from that particular book for Blood of a Novice. And it's an epic fantasy, but it's got that really tight lens on the main character that I wanted to do.
Cam Fold, right?
Cam Fold, that's right.
Though he's not as proficient in martially as as Waylon, he still has the same drive as Waylon. Like you can see it from the start. Like he wants to be better as Waylon does as well.
Yeah, and some of that comes from just studying high-end athletes. If you ever look at the life of a high-end, whatever they are, wrestler, figure skater, anybody who's at the highest end of Olympic athletics, those people just are wired differently, especially if they're in any kind of direct competition with somebody else, where they're physically touching them like a wrestler would. I mean, I always read the story of Kurt Angle. He won the gold in
1996.
1996, like 200 some odd pounds. He was small for his weight class, and he trained for 2 months with a broken neck to get to the Olympics. He wasn't going to stop. I mean, that's just a kind of an insane way of thinking about it, but that's kind of how I approached some of the characters, is that they're just different than the rest of us. We aren't going to train with a broken neck for 2 months, but these loons will.
I don't know if you saw the Michael Jordan series on Netflix.
Last Dance.
That's the same
Yes,
thing.
Last Dance. Yeah. You see that it was.
Yeah.
You can see his drive. Like he talks about this. Like it doesn't matter if my body is broken. If I'm like when he wants to win, and that is it. Like he will force everyone along as well to come up to his standards. Just to that because of his drive to win.
Yeah, Tom Brady is the same way. It's like he almost bends reality. That you think there's no chance he's going to win. All of us would be like, there's no chance we can win. Brady never has a doubt that he will win. And so they're down in the game, especially against Atlanta. They're down like 28-3 in the Super Bowl, going into the late third quarter. And I bet you Brady never had a single doubt they were going to win. And sure enough, they do. I mean, it's like reality bends to his will. Reality bends to Jordan's will. It's just bizarre. But those are some of the things that I wanted to talk about with Blood of a Novice. Is Cam has that drive, and he may not be the most powerful, but he never fails because of lack of confidence that he can win. Although he starts pretty rough.
I can't wait to read that book. That you listening to this part of the conversation and listening to your character you're describing, Davis, reminds me specifically of if you've ever read Evan Winter, and like so Teo, he is that person. He becomes this super killing machine simply because he refuses to, be anything else. He's not the biggest, he's not the strongest. He doesn't start off as the most naturally gifted, but he does something. I don't want to spoil the book for anyone who hasn't read it, but
he's an absolute machine. He's a loon. Complete and total loon.
Yes.
But he's a machine. The main character in Instrument of Omens would share a lot in common with him, except he'd be sane. There's a difference. And you'd want to have a drink with Cinder Shade. I don't know if you'd ever want to have a drink with Evan's main character. I'd be terrified of that guy. I'd say something wrong and he'd like stab me just because I took him off.
He seems pretty obsessive and not the laid back guy that you want to go to the bar with. So
not at all. He's tough, but he's fascinating, isn't he?
Yeah, no, he's fascinating. I actually had a question for Mihir about Davis's book. So you've read a lot of Davis's work. So, and obviously, I trust your opinion implicitly as a blogger. You're so well respected. I love reading your reviews. You know that. But how would you describe Davis's work? How would you describe his writing style? How would you describe his work? Like, how would you describe it?
So,
first, selling it to me as someone who hasn't read his work.
So I would sell it to you as epic fantasy. Like he does epic. He goes epic all out. Like there is no middle ground. Like he doesn't do low fantasy. And the best part is like when he goes epic, he goes the Robert Jordan route. You'll get characters who are rich. You'll get characters who go through arcs, and you'll get a really dense world. And when I say dense, it's like there's like he mentioned there's a 3,000 year old history that is there. You can feel it there. And also, fun fact, as an aside, he has maps, which I love. So I'm a little bit partial to that. So that forgive my bias about maps, but As a map lover, I love that there's map and there's things which are shown, which I know that there's going to be something else over there. But no, I would really recommend his, the Cast and Outcast series, just because it's finished. It's 3 books. Again, they're not as lengthy, but they're bigger than most epic fantasy books. And he has infused them with the Indian mythology. Again, not the usual Indian mythology, but the Rakshasas. I love that angle, because he doesn't just present them as these bad guys. They're essentially a little bit on the evil spectrum, but they're not all bad. There's a line of thinking to them. Now, his Cast and Outcast, there's not a dark lord, there's a dark lady, and you'll find out why, because she's scary. I think Davis mentioned this in one of the interviews as she's a little bit schizophrenic in her way of thinking. And when you see her line of thinking, it makes sense. But of course, you're not, because that would make you something weird as well. But no, I would recommend him to, his books to you, as they're really epic, they're really character heavy, and there's a lot of action. If you like military academy style, where the world gets explored because the main character has amnesia, the Instruments of Omens is for you, because this main character, literally, not a spoiler, the book begins with him coming out of amnesia, not exactly knowing who he is, and then slowly he starts developing physically, and I don't want to say magically, but there's something metaphysically, so to speak. And then you, as a reader, are also finding out more about the world, because he's finding out more about the world, and it somehow connects with. Again, it's an anchored world, so there's connections to the other series. The William Wilde one, I've only read book 1. It begins on YA. It's set in the 80s, if I'm not wrong, and it's on the East Coast, right, in a high school. So there's a fun element to that. But then the latter books, but there's also, right in book 1, that it's a little bit darker than Harry Potter, that there's something else going on. In the first 10%, if I'm not wrong, there's a really dark scene. I don't want to spoil it, but then you know that it's not going to be light. And then his most recent book, which I love, I think, honestly, you should start with the Cast and Outcast. And then in between, you can read the Instruments of Omens, because it's going to be big and it's going to be epic. And it's, again, I think your Drowned Kingdom series and the Instruments of Omens are kind of similar. They're burgeoning world, really, in-depth characters, and then the world history is there, and you will find out more and more. And now I'll shut up.
Okay, fantastic. Well, I'm getting excited now to read Davis's stuff. I'm getting really excited, so that's great. Thank you.
But also, I'm a bit biased because I like his book, so please take that as well. There's always that. There's as a reader, when you like somebody's books, you want to push them on to everybody else. But there's, keep that in mind. I'm a little biased because also he has Indian mythology. I find that it's very rare for me to find Indian mythology done in epic fantasy and done really well. So there's that too. I want to point that out. But if you love Indian mythology, or if you want to explore cool Indian mythology, his books are absolutely great.
Yeah, that is something that I am absolutely fascinated with. And, of course, I have limited knowledge, but I mean, there's so many fantastic authors now of Indian descent writing Indian inspired fantasy that are so high on my TBR. They're eradicating a lot of books that I otherwise had. And, Steve has had some of them on Future John's channel. I've seen, some great ones. Ganti, he was on, oh my gosh, when was he on Page doing? He was on Sons of Darkness. Yeah, last month. Yeah. So I'm very excited to read Davis's work. I'm very stoked, and I'm a big. Steve knows me well. Mihir knows me well. I'm all about epic fantasy world building. That's my jam. So sounds right up my alley. Yeah, I'm sold.
Awesome. Thank you, Mihir. The check will come in the mail.
And Mihir, I think you had. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. I was just going to say that the one thing about Instrument of Omens is that it's not done. There's 3 books. They're pretty big books, but I'm working on book 4. So just because I started a new series didn't mean I abandoned Instruments. I am writing book 4, and I'm about halfway through, which is cool.
Oh, nice. Mihir, you had a question about progression fantasy that I was
curious
about. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to ask you this because, Davis, you started writing on epic fantasy books. You did a little bit of YA, but that was still epic as well. And now with this, the Instruments of Omens and with the newest book, Blood of the Novice, they're both on the, they're both more, they're more progressive fantasy than anything else. For our, for the channel listeners of and the viewers of Steve's channel, can you maybe talk a little bit more about what exactly is progression fantasy, and
Sure.
how that kind of is a little bit different than epic fantasy, because I don't want people to be like, oh, they're going in expecting epic, but they're not really getting that, and then they might be confused about that.
there's not a really hard definition for progression fantasy. I mean, I think one of the most popular right now is Cradle, the Cradle series by Will White. But the way I think of it is, it's usually about a single character or a small group of characters who are progressively getting more powerful. It's as simple as that. So they start off as the runts from the middle of nowhere, and then through luck or whatever, hard work or both, they discover a bigger world, or the bigger world discovers them. And then in order to either stay alive or do something important, they have to master the magic of that world and become as powerful as anybody else in that world, or as powerful as it's possible to become in that world. Now, that's how I think of it. And Instrument of Omens has some of that element, because Cindershade, spoiler alert, he does become stronger as the books go on. But I mean, that's kind of common, right? I mean, Rand al'Thor, when he left his little village in the Two Rivers, he barely knew how to pull a sword out of the scabbard, much less use it. And he definitely got stronger. So you could, same with all the characters really from the Two Rivers, they weren't very powerful, and they all became super powerful by the end of the series. So from that regard, you could say that's a progression fantasy. But the difference is that in progression fantasy, there's almost like a really locked in focus on that growth. And there's numbers often associated with that growth. Like they're at copper, they're at tin, they're at bronze, they're at silver, they're at gold, they're at platinum. You know, you give them numbers, or S rank, or F rank, E rank, D rank, C rank. You give them an actual scale that it's easy for the reader to say, okay, so they're at C rank right now, but the really super powerful people are at S rank, or they're at gold rank right now, but the overlord, they're way more powerful. I mean, it's just a way for the reader to understand where they stand in the grand scheme of things. And that can sometimes be fun. Sometimes it can be limiting, because as a writer, you have to stay in these narrow paths. But the way I think of it is, most of the world exists on a continuum. So I'm going to say that all of these ranks are artificial. And just because they're at a lower rank doesn't mean they can't take out somebody at a slightly higher rank. But they're certainly not going to take out the God level rank. You know, a 2-year-old's not going to be able to dunk on LeBron James. It's just not going to happen. Maybe they could dunk on a 3-year-old though. So that's kind of how I think of it. There's just that really tight focus on the growth aspect itself. That's not to say that the story isn't also important and the plot isn't important, but the people who really like progression, they do like that clear delineation. And so that's part of what I did with Blood of a Novice, is gave those ranks and gave those delineations. And it was a lot of fun, but I also approached it a little bit differently, because I watched this TV show called True Detective, and I watched this podcast about True Detective in 7, and I wasn't aware of this, but it's apparently common knowledge in the screenwriting community. But what you do with some of these characters is there's a wound that they suffer, not a physical wound, an emotional wound that lingers with them as a ghost, and it teaches them the wrong lesson, or they take the wrong lesson. So all their life, they're harboring this ghost and living a life based on that ghost, where the lesson that they learned is wrong, and they have to recover from it. They have to learn the proper lesson so that they can heal. And so Cam, my main character, he's an alcoholic. He's at the age of 15, he's gravely wounded, and he becomes an alcoholic. So there's a bit of a trigger there, because he never overcomes that alcoholism. Anytime he smells it or is offered it, it's there again, that desire. And all of the characters suffer from some kind of emotional scarring. So people who are looking for that overpowered main character that just goes around like Conan, kicking over anthills and never, really losing anything, that's not Blood of a Novice. It's not dark. It's not grimdark by any stretch. I don't think it is it, Mihir? No.
It's not grimdark. Definitely not. It has a little bit of darkness, but it's not. I wouldn't even call it dark fantasy. It's more epic. I mean, it's epic and progression.
Yeah, but the characters have scars that are evident. So them healing themselves is part of the progression aspect, actually.
When you talk about progression fantasy, Davis, that was fascinating. So I know for me, I don't know if it has to do with the fact that I sucked at math, I sucked at science in school. Maybe that's why I took arts and humanities in university, because I suck. I mean, I do my taxes and balance my checkbook, but I'm certainly no. You obviously as a doctor, you have a more of a medical quantitative background. But aside from that, because it might have nothing to do with it in terms of what you like. Like I know for me that I've always preferred softer magic, right? In my fantasy, I've always preferred the
I'm
stuff
with
like
you. I'm
Lord of the Rings.
100%
Like
with
you don't know where Gandalf powers come from.
Yeah.
You don't know why he can do this or why Saruman can do this, but they can just do it. And however, many people prefer the hard magic, more like a rigid, more scientific approach, like Sanderson,
Right.
with the alloys, it's like all that, right? And I've enjoyed both. Howard Thomas Riley, a great writer. He's written, We Break Immortals, and his magic system to me rivals Sanderson. It's that detailed. It's that broken down to the last element, and a fantastic book, but very hard magic system. So do you find that with progression fantasy, and you've written progression fantasy, do you feel more constrained and more boxed in when you write, because you have to subscribe to this, essentially a harder magic system, as opposed to a bit more of the, I guess, the latitude with soft magic to kind of, okay, well, this just happens because it happens.
Wave your hand. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I do. I think I kind of mix it a little bit, because in Cast and the Outcast, the 7 different casts, the classical casts in the series, they all have their own type of magic. So they're kind of rigid in that way. And then in William Wilde, it's much more hand wavium, because they just create weaves and braids and decide whatever they want to do happens if I allow it to happen. Instrument of Omens, it's going to become more hand wavium, because at some point it's like, are you really going to explain how they're flying? Right? I mean, they just kind of go. You're not going to say, and then they did blah, 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 and roll the dice, and off they went. I mean, I'd find that a little bit dull. So we'll probably just say they go. In Blood of a Novice, it's been restrictive because the characters are young and they're new and their powers are undeveloped. So they can't really do a lot. Like, they have telekinesis, but they can literally lift 5 pounds 5 feet in the air. That's it. That doesn't really do much, or it might even just be 1 pound, 1 foot in the air. I can't remember, but it's not a lot. So the magic, because they're weak, it constrains you with what you want to do, but eventually they'll get stronger, and there are levels. And so I've written in the constraints of all these different levels, how long they can do things, all those kind of things. I actually don't think that's going to hurt me at all or hinder me at all. I think it's actually going to guide me in the storytelling of what they can and can't do at any particular point, and make me think about how they would approach a problem a little bit more carefully. At least I hope so.
And moving on for a little bit from the progression fantasy aspect, you mentioned that you're writing book 4, and you have this new series out. So will you be alternating these books with the Eternal Ephemera books and the Instruments of Omens, Davis, for the next few years?
Yeah, that's the plan, is to go back and forth. I mean, from a financial perspective, the better idea would be to just write Instrument of Omens, right? I mean, that's what I'm known for, and that's what's been my biggest seller. But my heart is in the Eternal Ephemera as well. Didn't expect to write that series at all. It just kind of came to me in a dream, and so I wrote it. And so there's a big part of my heart that has to write that, even if it isn't the smart financial move. But I'm lucky enough still to be able to write what I want to read.
How many books are you planning in the Eternal Ephemera? Because if I'm not wrong, Instruments of Omens, you have mentioned in an interview that it's going to be 7 books long.
Right. So Eternal Ephemera is probably going to be 5 big chunky books long.
Oh wow.
That's
Okay.
the goal. Yeah. So
8
it's not
months
going to be
book.
so it's not going to be a trilogy, but and it's going to take a while since I'm going back and forth.
Mhm.
But hey, good things come to those who wait, I hope, right?
Your fans must be, like asking you, or where's the 4th book? Where's the 5th book? Right? Because if I'm
Yes,
not wrong, that is your
they are
biggest seller.
definitely asking about the 4th book of Instruments. Some of them were afraid I was dropping it since Blood of a Novice was coming out, but I think they're okay now that I've been posting it on
Mhm.
Patreon that, hey, it's actually in existence. You can actually read it too.
Sorry, I didn't want to be asking too many of the questions to you. PL, you guys go ahead. Oh, what do you do, Davis? Like, with your work being so mentally exhausting and physically exhausting, you're a writer as well. What are some, like, how do you decompress? Like, I know you're a big sports fan because you've been giving all these wonderful sports analogies, so that's very evident from over there. But besides
Yes.
that, what else do you do to decompress? Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Well, I don't watch the Cincinnati Bengals when they're losing because those sons of they lose. They went to the Super Bowl last year. That was the most fun I've had watching football in forever. But I like to watch sports. I do watch that a lot when my team is playing or when the team I'm interested in is playing or something is going on that I'm interested in. Otherwise, I like to read. That helps me decompress. My kids are 21 and 19, and they've got really interesting brains. And they come down and we'll talk for an hour about history, theology, philosophy, politics, world events. And that's just really cool. It's like I've got 2 boys that somehow they kind of like me, and it's just really nice that they do. And so hanging out with them when they come down to talk to me is wonderful. I love that. That's like my favorite part of any week is when one of them wants to hang out with me or watch a TV show with me. So those are the things that I do to decompress. I go out to dinner with my wife. I watch some TV, not a lot, but some, although I binge watched a Korean fantasy drama called Alchemy of Souls. And you have to get in the right headspace for that because it's almost like a live action anime without some of the annoying aspects of anime. But once you get past the bad CGI and you look at how lush the character, the costuming, the set pieces, the cinematography, they do an incredibly beautiful job. And once you accept how they are writing their characters, that's their tick, and it's okay. It's not right or wrong. It's for them, and you can accept it and move past it. And it takes about an episode and a half to really, just don't go in with preconceived notions and just accept what you're seeing. Then it's just such a wonderful show. And there's like, I think 20 episodes, and I burned through them. Absolutely loved them.
I'll check it out. Do you want to give any shout outs to any books or which you read recently or authors whom you love?
I always shout out to my friends because I always love what they write. So Dirk Ashton, who wrote the most epic urban fantasy of all time in Paternus. Bryce O'Connor, who doesn't need any help selling The Iron Prince, but it's a fantastic book. Phil Tucker, whose Bastion is wonderful, but whose Chronicles of the Black Gate is even better. And I really, really wish Phil would write the Chronicles of the White Gate, but I'm assured that that's not going to happen. And, I actually read a romantic fantasy the other day. What was it called? Frost or something like that. It was by C.M. Crawford, I think that's the name of the author, because it's a husband and wife team writing as one under one pen name. But romantic fantasy authors, man, they can really just lock you into a character so fast, just like romance authors. They just, bam, they've got you. It's just one page and suddenly you've got an entire character right in front of you. So I read those a lot. Like Elise Kova, I read one of her books, and it's the same thing. It's like they're just geniuses at creating a character in one page. And so I read those a lot just because I'm fascinated by how they do what they do. I think their craft is beautiful. So those are my shout outs.
Elise Koa has some really gorgeous covers. I love her covers. Like I remember.
Yeah, The Era Awakens is
Yes.
fantastic.
Yes.
That's a beautiful cover.
I haven't read her books, but I know her covers. Like they really draw the eye.
Yeah, and again, these are not every book is going to appeal to every reader. That's fine.
Mhm.
Everybody's different. I like the books. I enjoy them quite a bit, but I really, really am impressed by their craft.
Well, I must say, and I know analytics isn't everything, but I mean, I just quickly popped onto Goodreads, and looking at Instrument Romans 1, 3,832 ratings and a 4.43 average on Goodreads. I mean, my, that is impressive, Davis. I mean, that is definitely a successful book by any definition, especially for a self-published fantasy writer. So kudos to you. Obviously, people love your work, and that's a testament. So I already added that series to Goodreads. So I'm all keyed up now, and I'll be getting to that sometime in the future. So I'm excited.
Hope you enjoy it. Really do. Let me know. Unless
I
you
will
won't,
for sure.
then don't let me know.
He has he is a really active fans. Like they might not be active online, but they hound him. Like I know because you can see it in the ratings and like the innumerable reviews. Like they just lap his stuff up.
Yeah, you obviously have quite a wide audience, and you're quite popular. There's no, those numbers don't lie, right? You know what I mean? So yeah, kudos to you. That's a great success. I'm just blown away by how successful now. Davis mentioned Will White, New York Times bestseller. I mean, indie publishing, regardless, irrespective of genre, fantasy, otherwise, I mean, it's totally different now. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
the quality, the caliber, the credibility that it has now in the industry, it's still different. Like I said, Davis, that's why I'm so incredibly blown away by the fact that you came in the game at that time when it wasn't like this, and you still managed so much success. So, I think that's something you look back on with extreme pride.
Absolutely. I'm still in a state of shock a lot of times, like that I get to do this as I get to be a writer. I get to meet other writers, and it's like we're all in our little guild. I never expected that I could be part of that. I mean, that's just magical. Like when I go to Dragon Con, my favorite Christmas of the year, there's all these writers in the West, and I know them. I've read a lot of their books. They're wonderful people, and I get to be a part of that. It's just, it still takes a little bit of time to get used to. I still feel like, man, when are they going to kick me out of this?
Yeah, when are they going to cancel my membership? I feel the same way. And keep in mind, of course, that the writing community is now, I mean, it's so big. It's authors, writers, agents, booktubers, editors. It's just, there's so many people besides authors that are part of this community. Great people like Steve and Mihir that, really do so much to help promote our books and bring it to light. So thank you, gentlemen, again for that. It means so much, But it is. You do feel sometimes like, wow, I was on Philip Chase's channel earlier today for Dear Dr. Fantasy, and I'm thinking, I'm on Philip Chase's channel. This isn't real, right? You know what I mean? And you have to pinch yourself almost, that you have these opportunities, and so yeah. But kudos to you, Davis. You're obviously successful, and to be that successful as a self-published fantasy author, in the time that you started, I mean, like I said,
it's changed a lot. I mean, back in 2014, it wasn't thought of as being necessarily a viable career, and there used to be this old statistic tossed around that in America there were like 4,500 people who are making a living as fiction writers, and that statistic was just passed on. It was some stupidly low number like that. And so, I was at Dragon Con. I was just having breakfast. We just walked out. I don't know if you remember this. Mihir was with me was with us at Dragon Con. So we walk out to go have breakfast, and we meet a couple of other authors who are sitting at the table. So we're just talking to them, and I just counted up. There was like 9 authors there working full time, and that's their job. Their job is as writers. And there were 9 authors just sitting around these 2 tables. I was like, 5,000, really? That seems kind of low. If 9 of them are just sitting at this table in Atlanta doing, just having breakfast together, and we just all run into each other.
Yeah, I think people, and statistics again, they're not always some, they can be fallible, right? But I think I think for a lot of us as authors, and especially in the indie game, we measure ourselves against these benchmarks, these artificial benchmarks sometimes that don't, whether it's getting an Amazon bestseller tag or you sold, like you said, you sold your first 100 books. For me, it was after I sold 1,000 copies. And whatever your personal achievement line is. But I think people do have to remember that some of the other statistics, like how many people actually finish the book that they write.
Yep.
What I mean? I'd love to know that statistic. How many people write a second, a third, a fourth, a 10th. Right, I'm sure the numbers drop off exponentially as you move forward. So the fact that you've written a book and published it, that in itself is an accomplishment. And I think for me, I know I'm taking one day at a time and one book at a time now, just trying to hopefully, like you one day, Davis, you have quite an extensive body of work. Hopefully, be able to live long enough to look back and have an extensive body of work that somebody's read and what I mean, somebody's enjoyed. And I think I'm keeping my goal simple for now, but I am relishing every little success that I feel is something that's tangible. So,
and also like the indie scene is changing. Like you can't compare it to the traditional side. Like what those old successful standards were, they no longer apply. It's like it's going to change you. It's probably going to look different even 5 years from now. In 2027, maybe you might think of like, oh, that was such a wild time in 2022, but it's going to keep on changing. So.
One thing I've really wondered and worried about is, where are the new Sandersons, Jordans, Martins, even Good Kinds?
You are, Davis. You are.
not in traditional publishing. That's what I'm talking about, though. It's like, those giants of publishing, they don't seem to be discovering them in the traditional publishing field and traditional fantasy. Now, there are tons of them in YA. There's some humongous bestsellers in traditional YA fantasy. Sarah Moss, for instance.
Yeah, Sarah Moss, Holly Black, a lot of those are really big.
But in terms of what would be considered traditional epic fantasy, I don't know of any. Like Evan started out as an indie author, Evan Winter.
Yeah.
So did Anthony Ryan. And so it's like Josiah Bancroft. He started out, and he's got one of the most beautiful series of all time, in the Tower of Babel. But Jonathan French. I mean, these are authors who have sold well, but they all started out as indie. Like, where's the discovery of the next Robert Jordan for a traditional publishing house like Penguin or Tor or Del Rey? I wonder about that.
I think, and that's an excellent point, Davis. I think now, from my perspective, I have a lot of friends that are traditionally published. I have a lot of friends that are indie published, just like you do, just like we all do. All 4 of us do. I'm sure we could dial up hundreds if we all went through our phone book. There's hundreds of authors, literally, in both venues. But I think what's happened now is indie has changed that with the saturation of indie authors. I mean, you have authors that, you aptly pointed out, Davis, that they started out indie, they've gone traditional. Some of them gone back. Some of them said, you know what?
Right.
I was talking about this with Phil Chase today, that, you know what? Some authors said, you know what? I'm with Orbit, and this is a great series I have with Orbit, but I have this series on the shelf that I know they won't touch, and I really want to publish it, so I'm just going to self-publish it. And they do it. And I think with people, you mentioned Brandon Sanders, with Brandon Sanders' Kickstarter and actually essentially self-publishing, raising millions and millions of dollars for essentially self-publishing a series. Like, I mean, that's a game changer, right? Like, I think now it's actually so saturated in a weird way. Like Mihir said, I think we're in a weird transitional time in publishing that, indies are not quite like there's not 50 Will Whites out there that are on the New York Times, but there's a lot of indie authors who silently sell thousands and thousands of books.
There are that author I mentioned. I thought it's C.N. Crawford. I can't remember for sure, but there's like 10 or 12 authors like that in the romantic fantasy genre that probably outsell Will, which is
Mhm.
shocking when you
Shocking.
think about it. I mean, it's
Yeah.
like these monstrously popular authors that nobody knows about, or
Yeah.
at least their fans and readers obviously know them very, very well.
Yeah.
But I'm just discovering them, and I'm kind of like, where the hell do these people come from?
Yeah, because a lot of them aren't on social media, and they've managed
Yeah.
to be successful almost without social media for the most part.
They're actually on social media. It's just that social media is so compartmentalized that
Yes.
what we see in social media isn't what other people are seeing. And
Mhm.
so to me, it's like I'm discovering this entire new continent of incredible writers with their books that I thought, oh, it just blew up and God touched down, and 7 days later there it was. But no, these people have been working hard
Yeah.
for years, and their fans have known of them for years. But they're incredibly popular, and we just don't know it, or I didn't. It's really cool though that
And
there's all these tiers.
that exists in traditional publishing as well. I point to just someone like Janie Wirtz, who is an international
Mhm.
best-selling author, who has co-written a series with Raymond Feist that is a
That's
mega
my
series.
favorite of
Yep.
theirs.
The Empire Trilogy.
But really and truly, she is criminally underrated as an author, and she's a contemporary of George R. R. Martin. She came at the same time. Her books are certainly of that caliber. But there's a lot of traditionally published authors that still don't have the acclaim commensurate with how good writers they are and how well established they are in their body of work and how prolific they are, and now some of them are now being discovered years after they essentially discovered years after they wrote their first series. So it's a weird time. It's a weird time.
It's a great time for those other authors though, because if you think of somebody like Jennifer Robertson and her Tiger and Dell series, which I love that series, but in another time frame, those would be out of print and nobody would ever get a chance to discover them. But now they're electronically available, and you can read them. They're worth reading. They're wonderful books. Or the Riddle Master of Head series, which is just one of my favorite of all time. I love that. I love that Patricia McKillip can be discovered all new again. So it's just really a cool time too. It's a weird and cool time.
Well, as long as I always say, as long as you can find a way to keep your books in print, there's always hope, right? And for self-published authors, that's definitely within our control. And the way the current setup is, that as long as we can keep our books out there and we don't take them down ourselves, then they'll always be out there. So
that's true.
And Davis, we appreciate you coming by and spending some of your time with us.
Sure.
There's a question. Yeah, there's a question I always like to ask our guests, and that is, what was your first job?
My first job was janitor. I was a janitor for the Public Library of Cincinnati in Hamilton County. So that was a summer job. That was my first job. So I cleaned toilets, mopped floors, mowed lawns. That was my job.
How were your allergies back then? Were they as bad as they are now?
No, I had no allergies back then. I mean, it's one of those terribly awful things where I had no allergies at all until I was like 26, 27 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And now I go outside and I just inhale sharply, and suddenly, there it goes. And I have to take my antihistamine. I have to take my Singulair. I have to sometimes take Flonase. It's just miserable. I'm just glad those medicines are available. I don't know how I'd survive without those medicines. But back then, no problem. I could mow all day long and not sneeze once.
And what did you learn from that experience that stuck with you?
That I didn't want to be a janitor.
It's a good lesson to learn, right?
It wasn't a hard job in terms of, did it tax me mentally? But man, I was out there mowing lawn 6 hours a day. And I say I was a janitor, but really I was a groundskeeper.
Mm-hmm.
So I cleaned the bathrooms in the morning, cleaned the windows in the morning, and then they'd ship me off to go mow a couple of lawns. And I'd just be out there pushing a lawnmower all day. And you don't have to think when you're doing that. You just got to keep your wheels on the center line and go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And so it gave me a lot of time to think. But at the same time, I was like, I don't think I want to do this for the rest of my life.
That's where your medical career was born.
Yeah, it wasn't a bad job, but I honestly think everybody should do a hard physical job, because for some people it's wonderful. And for other people, it's just like, yeah, I don't want to do that. But it's worth doing for almost all of us to feel the sun on us all day long, to be hot and sweaty and tired at the end of the day. It's actually a good thing, I think.
I agree. And Mihir, I don't think we've asked you. You've been on, but I don't think we've asked you about your first job.
So this is going to be a weird answer because I grew up in India, we don't really we were as kids, we were not pushed to have jobs. Like our focus only on studies. So my first job was when I came to the US, and it was actually a clinical research coordinator because I was doing my master's in the in the evenings. I was like, I needed a job, and I asked because my mom was in the medical field. She was like, oh, there's a clinical coordination job. You might be interested. I'm like, I emailed the doctors, and they, I got a job, which was really interesting because it's not an easy thing with zero training. The only thing I didn't even know the ABCs of the job, but I learned quickly on the fly. So that was my first job. A very weird experience. It's something which Davis will know about this, because in India, we don't do jobs during or education years, or you finish your education by about 22s, when we get to our bachelor's, or we don't have bachelor's, but we do our junior college, and then we directly go to college, whatever it is, in arts, sciences, and commerce. And after you finish that, that's when you get your proper job. So, but I would have, if I had stayed back in India, I would be a doctor. So that was it.
Nice. That's interesting. So about 2022, that's when you venture out after you're done with your education?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. But also in India, we stay with our parents. There's no moving out as such. In India, most of the families stay together, or at least stay nearby. So, yeah. So it's you live in your parents' house. Maybe you might buy the adjoining house or the flat besides it, but you still stay around your parents. If I was living in India, my parents would be living with me. I would be living with my parents. That's just that's the normal thing. That's nobody bats an eyelid because that's what's expected, or that is the norm. So, of course, not to say that people don't live separately. They do, but it's mostly the fact that you stay with your parents, and then your children grow up, and then so on and so forth. It's nice, free daycare.
Yeah. That's true.
There's always that. So, Davis and Mihir, thanks again for coming by and hanging out with us. Really appreciate your time. Of course, Mihir, it's always a pleasure.
Oh, come on. You just say that. It's all Davis,
Thank you for having me. Thank you for the kind words, Mihir.
Hey, I'm a fan, so you're going to thank me. Just send me the checks.
I'll send you the check at DragonCon. I'll bring you a signed copy of something.
Nice. And Davis, if people want to find you and more about your work, where can they find you?
So I've got a website, www.davisashura.com, DAVISASHURA. I'm also on Facebook under that same name, and on Instagram. I think I recently restarted a Twitter account.
Yep.
Because I've got some books on consignment at Barnes & Noble, and they wanted me to have a Twitter account. So I was like, crap. All right. So I did. So those are the places you can find me: Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and on my website. My books are available on Amazon and on Audible. The print copies are available for all of those books on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, except Blood of a Novice. Blood of a Novice still doesn't have a print copy, but it will soon enough.
Nice. And all those links will be down below in the description if you're on the podcast or on YouTube. And Mihir, where's the best place to find you?
Well, that's on Fantasy Book Critic, where we post all our reviews. We are also on Twitter at Fantasy Book Crit. And of course, if you hang out around Steve's forums, you'll see me over there too.
Nice. And Mr. P.L. Stewart, where can people find you?
For stuff about my writing, the John Kingdom Saga, website www.plstewart.com. I'm on Twitter. That's my preferred social media handle. I'm also on Facebook and Instagram, but they're all at P.L. Stewart Writes. You can also find me, my reviews on Goodreads, and 11 Before We Go blog which is led by the incredible Beth Tabler. I'm an assistant editor there, so you can see my reviews there, post on the blog. My DMs are open. You want to talk about writing, and of course, you can find me beside my wonderful colleague here, Steve, on any episodes, and Taylor from Maybe Between the Pages on any episodes of Page Chewing.
Awesome. Thanks again, everyone. Really appreciate your time, and thanks for hanging out with us.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Davis. Thanks, PL.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care.
See y'all
Bye-bye,
later.
everyone.
Bye.